I am so excited to introduce our second speaker of the night. So, our second speaker of the night is Jocelyn. And Jocelyn was on the Canadian version of Trading Spaces called the Decorating Challenge. And the episode still lives somewhere on the internet, and I encourage you to find it. She helped run a summer camp in Awashima, Japan. And she started her digital marketing career when Facebook had just launched their events platform and ads weren't even a thing yet. Jocelyn, come on up and share your fuck up.
Thank you. Anybody else hate public speaking here? Yeah, perfect. If I start talking too fast, please raise your hand and I'll try and slow down. Okay, let me figure out this. There we go. So this is obviously not me. This is our lovely host, Marsha. About 7 years ago, just over 7 years ago, when Marsha was starting up Fuckup Nights, she was a member of Project Spaces, and that's where we met. The owner, Jeff Howard, introduced us, told her that I was an entrepreneur and maybe I'd be the right fit for an event. She looks at me and goes, "What have you fucked up?" And I looked at her and said, "What haven't I fucked up?" And that's kind of how that conversation started. 7.5 years later, here we are. I'm going to tell you two stories tonight. One's going to be a little bit more lighthearted, a little one, and the other one's going to be a little more serious and compounding. But we're going to kick off with the lighthearted one. When I was younger, and really when email was starting to become much bigger of a marketing platform, I made a major mistake, and it was horrific. And the way that my bosses handled it was horrific. But let's fast forward actually to about 6 months ago. One of my staff members who's here, I won't make her raise her hand, there was an email marketing program that we were putting out for one of our clients, and she distributed an email, and it looked like all of the URLs were broken on this thing. Took about 45 minutes. We were trying to troubleshoot everything. Turns out that it was actually okay. But in that 45 minutes, this woman had whipped herself into a tailspin, was completely hysterical. Her dad had to send her to bed with CBD with just hopes that it was going to be a better day the next day. When her and I started chatting the next day, I actually told her about my story. So when email marketing platforms were starting to introduce video and they were trying to test that out, I tried to test out an email for a client. I put a video into an email, and then I accidentally hit send to their entire mailing list. No subject line, no description line, just a video of a pig. That was it. That's all. It actually tore me down. It was a completely humiliating experience. We had to send this huge apology afterwards. And my bosses didn't handle it well. But what I was trying to do is use it as an example for her to go, we all screw up. You're going to have to learn from it. You're going to have to move on. And there was kind of two things I took from this fuck up overall. The first one is that number one, you build your email and then you put the list in. And thank God most platforms now actually force you to do it that way. This was not the case originally about 15 years ago. The second thing that I also learned from this though is when you start hiring juniors, they're gonna make the same mistakes that you do. And one of the things that you can do is use your experiences as teachable moments and make sure that you're actually approaching it with grace. Because no matter what type of prevention you put in place, everybody is human, someone's gonna make the same mistake. So we're gonna now move on to the next fuck up. And this one I think is the largest one that I've ever done, which was I didn't take care of my mental health while I was trying to launch a business. When I started, I'm actually going to quickly start off with a stat. Between 2016 and 2018, the Canadian government funded a study to actually research mental health among entrepreneurs. And what they found was that entrepreneurs experience periods of anxiety, depression, and stress 4 to 6 days a week, whereas on average, the general public is about 1 to 3 days a week. So I'm not going to tell you that this is the reason that you should look at your boss and be like, hey, I understand what you're doing now, but it's just something that actually directly impacts how somebody's making their decision making, and it's going to kind of come into play in this huge story. So I started my business in 2012. Before I had even started that, there were a lot of things in my life that I hadn't really gone and taken care of or dealt with in my mind. I was bullied as a kid. I was assaulted in my 20s. I had a couple of bad bosses, the ones that scream every time, no matter what you do, it could even be good, but all of a sudden they're at 100 decibels. I was very, very sexualized by leaders in my industry that are 5, 10, 15, 20 years my senior. And when it came to understanding power dynamics in my 20s, I very much struggled and I didn't really know how to handle that. But I also never got it dealt with. I didn't talk to my family about it, I didn't talk to my friends. This was just stuff that constantly happened. Then we start the business. I started a business because I had a bunch of freelance clients, which was great, and we actually started going off really well. But in the first couple of years, like any business, there's ebbs and flows, goods and bads, but because of the compounding effect of everything previously, and even, the great things where we got new business, or we had to fire somebody, or we lost business because we screwed up, or we lost business not because it was our fault. There was a lot of things that happened, and I hadn't really built the coping mechanisms to deal with the stress related to that. This is me actually where Marcia and I met at Project Spaces as well. And in the period of that time, it took a couple of years, but it really surmounted to a pretty dark and scary space. Around 2014, it really kicked off for about 3 years. And my biggest failure was never actually addressing where my mental health was at and how to put in coping mechanisms to deal with the stress that comes with entrepreneurship. So between 2014 and 2017, we made a lot of fuck-ups. I paid staff late. I brought on vendors that were out of scope and out of budget. I had a fight with the CRA. I think I became a screamy boss myself, which was the worst thing for me to know that I had become, because that was the thing that I hated the most. Honestly, you name it, we probably made that mistake as a business. I actually, in fact, believe that we shipped about 50 kilograms of product across the country when it was really just supposed to go across the city. A bunch of things like that where when you are not reasonable or rational in your decision making, you start making mistakes. And part of that was this mental health component that I didn't really deal with. The number one thing about where I screwed up in this, though, was actually around my staff. I started internalizing a lot of things. I stopped actually communicating with the staff on a lot of what was going on, in particular where we were in terms of a financial crisis. When it became really evident that we were having a cash flow problem, 80% of my staff quit, and you want to know what? It was rightfully so. But I continued into a tailspin, and I still had a series of staff there. Between the ones that were older and the ones that had come on in that period of time, the other problem that I also was I was not keeping them accountable to their jobs either. So what I was doing, from an apology standpoint, was going, so sorry that I've screwed up over here. I'm gonna also just do your job and you can just kind of sit over here and hang out for the day. And that was how I started interpreting a lot of how to apologize for the failures that were just ongoing, as opposed to leaning on these people as the support mechanisms to get us out of the hole. It all kind of came to a head for a couple of months, over a couple of months, and there was 3 key things that happened. The first one was my dad came into the office, and he sat down. You don't know my father, but this is the most calm, cool, collected human being on the planet, and if he's coming to me to tell me I have a problem, we are in a big, big trouble. So he walks in, sits down, kind of looks at me, goes, yeah, is this maybe it? Do you maybe go on and try something else, find another job, go somewhere? I was devastated, cried, he left, I kept pushing through. And then about 2-3 weeks later, I was at my parents' house and I began to have a refrigerator meltdown. This is what I started calling them, because most of the time when I started crying, I was either opening the fridge or leaning against it in heaves. And so mid-refrigerator meltdown, my mom looks at me and she goes, I don't know if you know this, but you're sad all the time. And I don't know how to get you out of it. And I was like, okay, we're in real trouble. And I, again, kind of was fits and starts trying to figure things out. But I couldn't really get there. I was still in a tailspin, and I wasn't reaching out for help, which was also a really big problem. The last thing that also kind of came to a head, I was at a friend's birthday party. And one of my best friends and I walk in, we're having a great time. We go and stand out on the patio. I've had a horrific day. I know I've got to call the CRA the next day, which if anyone here has had to do that, you know that that's not going to be a fun time. And I'm just really stressed out. And we're sitting there having a drink, and we're outside on the patio, and just having a nice little chat. And I look down, and I'm just like, man, jumping off this would be easier than what I have to do tomorrow. And it scared the absolute shit out of me. I had been sad, dark, and scary, but I had never actually had any sort of suicidal thought in my life. So it actually forced the hardest change for me. Took about a couple years, though, from when that point was to where I actually started feeling like we were a success again. But what I really learned from that moment was that I had stopped reaching out for help. I was trying to internalize way too much. I was not asking for anybody around me to even try and support me anymore. I just thought you had to keep your head down and push through, and that was all that was going to happen. The thing is that obviously did not work for what we were trying to do. So I started taking things a little bit slower. I restructured the business, restructured us actually straight into fully only contractors for quite a while. We had no full-time staff, so that it could actually ebb and flow a little bit easier. I actually took some time and I really focused on what is going to make me more successful. What do I have to do to make my life work around work and vice versa? How do I become a better friend, a better family member? How do I make sure that I've got the things I love, travel, arts, creative, photography, all that kind of stuff in my life? And it took quite a while, took about 2 years, but I started feeling really great. So we're getting up to about 2019, as most of you can tell, and we started heading into 2020. As we all know, that was an experience. I moved home with my parents for a few months just to make sure they were okay, and actually just to make sure I was okay. They have a house. I lived in an apartment. I wanted to be able to get outside. And about this, I think it was the second or the third extension of the lockdown, but about mid-April. And in 48 hours, we lost 98% of our planned business for 2020. And the last phone call, I hung up. I was sitting on the couch. My dad came up the stairs. I told him what happened. And he looked at me and went, "Are you okay?" And for the first time in a really long time, and it took me by surprise, I was like, "Yeah." And I realized that I actually had the coping mechanism, the tools, the resources, and the ability to go back and ask for help to be able to actually manage this experience. And in this period of time, I was about 6 years in business at this point. I had just gone through absolute hell and back. And it was really interesting and heartbreaking to watch a lot of my friends who are entrepreneurs actually go through their first business hardship. And for the next 2 years, I did way more listening than I did talking about where I was at, because so many people hadn't actually had to put those, again, coping mechanisms in place to handle what the stresses are of entrepreneurship. So it was really kind of an interesting time for that. One of the things for me, no, all good. Are you good? I'm good. Oh, thank you. I got new pants today, too. Suffice to say, one of the things for me is that I really actually make sure that I am trying to prioritize myself sometimes when it comes to how I manage my business. I make sure I have my own creative and travel outlets. Last October, again, while I was in Scotland, my brother and his wife had their first baby. This is Lizzie. But while I was away, I actually picked up a Paddington. And so then Paddington and I had our adventures around Scotland and Iceland, took tons of photos, and now one of the things I'm working on is for her first birthday, she'll have a book about how Paddington found his forever home. I also really might try and make sure for me that I actually celebrate the bigs and the littles. So big events, weddings, 65th, 70th birthdays, anniversaries, all of those types of things. But I also try and make sure I celebrate the littles. That could be dancing in tutus in a cottage with a bunch of your girlfriends. It's a 10 out of 10 experience I highly recommend. Also the best Amazon purchase I think I've ever made. But it's also other little things, and not necessarily, again, those big events. Last week, I was actually at a cheese potluck to celebrate somebody quitting their job that was toxic, which was amazing. I love that. And making sure I spend time and making sure I actually actively make time for these things is super important. The other thing that's also changed around my business, there's actually, I think, about 60% of my staff here today, which is a big change. As I've kind of rebuilt this company, there's been several things that are kind of my priority. Number one is culture, making sure the culture is something where everybody wants to come to work every day. Communication, we actually have check-ins in our management meetings about team demeanor to make sure everybody is understanding why they're here and nobody's getting lost in the fray. We have a lot of reviews on how we've lost clients, whether it was our fault or a change in management or what have you, or change in protocol. We always look at what we can be doing better. We have been actively trying to continue to improve our processes. I actively try and not live this business in my head and communicate even how I'm feeling. And it's changed us for the better. Last year, we increased by 473%, which was amazing. We've been able to create some big brands, collect in some big brands, and it's been really just an awesome time, and I can't thank them enough for their time. But it doesn't mean that I don't actually ever not fuck up anymore. I actually hope I never stop fucking up. These 4 pictures right here actually are me and Feta on an adventure to Niagara Falls. Me and Feta and everybody else, we're all taken within 10 days of each other. So just less than a week and a half ago, for about 35 days straight, I had something every night or I was not staying in my own place. And it was completely insane. I ran myself absolutely ragged. And for the first time since 2018, I was standing in LaGuardia Airport having an unbelievable panic attack going, dear God, just get over the border so if you have to go to the hospital, it's not in New York. And this is my whole goal. The difference between this time in 2017, 2015, 2016 was that I actually have coping mechanisms in place. And instead of trying to barrel through, I actually took the following week after this weekend, and spent almost the entirety of the time alone. And gave myself time to reset, reflect, make sure that I actually had an idea of what was going on, because all of these were great things. And we have been experiencing, like everybody else, we always have hardships in our business as well, but there was a really big combination of good and bad, but also just busy. And not actually giving myself time to deal with that was a huge thing. So this is why I say I don't think I'll ever stop fucking up, but thank you very much for your time, and I really appreciate it.
You can go to the next one. Perfect. No, stay here. Jocelyn, that was incredible. That was such a powerful story. I'm so grateful that we met all those years ago, and I feel like the timing was right for you to share this story now. We always try to find speakers who can share a story once they're kind of like out of the fuck up in a lot of ways and can look back and share some really great lessons. Also, I don't know if you remember this, but before we even met in person, you actually secured our very first sponsor for Fuckup Nights through Orchestra Marketing. It was like a random dating app that paid for the pizza on our first event. Zapeel, yes.
First video dating app.
Yeah.
That was ridiculous.
It was, super funny. But yeah, I'm really excited to open it up for some Q&A for Jocelyn. Let's do it.